Well, I'm really excited to welcome you to my Core Connections podcast today. I know we've got some great conversation in store for everyone. So I would like to get started with having you just share with all of my listeners a little bit more about you and what got you interested in going down the deep rabbit hole that is EMFs and our health.
Sure. Thank you so much, Erica, for having me. It's really exciting to be here on the Core Connections podcast. So I'll try to be really quick about it because I know everyone's really interested in the subject more than me. I have a company called Shield Your Body, or SYB, and we make products that reduce your exposure to EMF and 5G radiation. And the way I got into this, it's almost 10 years ago now. My father was one of the leading scientists in the world on EMF health effects, both as a scientist and as an activist academic. And he was writing a book about what he knew and what he had learned and his understanding of this issue, the health effects of EMF. And he asked me to jump in and help him because I had some experience writing books and public speaking, communication, distilling complex subjects down to a more approachable format. So that's what I did. I hopped in, I helped him, and ended up writing the book with him. And it was pretty formative experience for me. I mean, I'd grown up my whole life, knowing what my father did, but not really deeply into it. And in the course of writing that book, I realized that the science that shows that EMF affects all living things and often in harmful ways, it's pretty strong at this point. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of studies now in a wide variety of biological systems. But, all modern technology emits this stuff. So while there are safer ways, and we could talk about that if you want, there's safer ways that companies could be designing products. You're never going to get rid of all of it unless you effectively want to go back to the economy of the 1850s. And so I knew there had to be safer ways to use this technology. And that's where the idea for SYB came from.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm really excited to chat about all this, and absolutely would love to, we can get in and talking about the safer ways of using all of our technology. And since I have a lot of moms in my audience, I actually want to start off with the conversation about, kids and all of the EMFs and how it can affect, and this is probably like a multiple, kind of question. There's never just one answer to it, right? But if we can talk about kids and how, all the technology and kids with iPads and iPhones now, and, how can we go about all this? One, I guess, is like, how does it affect the body? And then two, with our kids, what can we do to help minimize our kids' exposure? Because I don't know, kids may even have more exposure than a lot of us adults by having iPads on their laps and starting out with a cell phone on their body at such a young age.
Yeah, it's not just more, and it is more exposure, but it's not just more exposure because they're getting that exposure so early in life. They're going to have cumulatively much greater exposure by the time they're our age. And any damage that occurs as a result of their exposures, they have many, many more years to live with that impact. So children are particular. So the fact that they have longer to live is a significant consideration, but there's more to it than that because there's some key physiological differences between adults and children. So one, for example, children, well, obviously they're much smaller, which means their heads are much smaller, which means that, just to take a simple example, let's say a certain level of radiation from a cell phone would go 1 or 2 inches into our brain. That would impact much more of a child's brain because their brain is so much smaller. At the same time, their skulls are thinner because the skull provides a certain degree of natural shielding. And so with thinner skulls, they have less of that natural shielding. So they are more vulnerable because they're smaller. They are more vulnerable because their skulls are thinner, but also because they are growing so quickly. So if a cell, if DNA in a cell is damaged, that is going to replicate much more rapidly with much wider impact on a child than it would on an adult. So that's just some of the reasons why children are so much more vulnerable than adults to this type of damage. In terms of the scope of potential damage, it's a really broad subject, but EMF, what the science is showing us is that EMF really impacts essentially every system in our body. It's not like it's just the brain, or it's just melatonin production, or it's just sperm production, or it's every single every single system in our body is impacted by exposure to EMF. And there are a few reasons that scientists think that's the case. One is because DNA is shared throughout every system in our body. Every cell in our body has DNA, and EMF has been shown repeatedly in high quality peer-reviewed scientific research to lead to to DNA mutations within the cell, and even strand breaks where the DNA actually comes apart and can lead to cell death.
So,
So
Mark, can I ask
yeah.
a question? And you may not know the answer to this, but I know you've gone through so much research. Is there kind of a consensus of to how, like, what's a minimum amount of kind of EMF exposure? Like phones, computers, like is it like at a minimum of say an hour a day exposure to? Do we know any of that? Do we have any sort of data that kind of shows like, okay, if we can obviously minimize our exposure, but like, I mean, now in schools, like my kids get, by a certain age, they all get like a Chromebook that
Mhm.
gets sent home with them. And, and so like that always concerns me, and always like, don't put it on your lap, like stop. You can't be doing stuff with a computer on your lap. Like there's so many habits that get started that make it so much worse, right? And we can talk about all those, but I'm like just thinking, kids are around. If you're at school for 7-ish hours a day, you're around that for 7-ish hours a day, plus coming home and whatever else exposure you have.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty key to the world today, is that, I mean, because people like you and me, we think we grew up in the age of technology, and in large part we did, certainly compared to our parents. But the scope of EMF emissions and human exposures today is so much greater than it was even 10 years ago, much less 20 and 30 years ago. And so your question's a really good one, and science can provide some type of answer to it, but it's not quite as precise as anyone would ideally like. And it's because it's really hard to study that specific question in science, because in order to do that, you'd have to have a kid who didn't have any EMF exposure, and then one who used a cell phone just for 15 minutes a day, and then monitor them for 20 years and see what changes there were. And in today's world, there's no unexposed population. So there's no control group to measure against. That said, there are studies. Leonard Hardell published a pretty influential one that talked about cumulative exposure by the age of 20, and oh man, please forgive me, I'm not great at memorizing numbers, but I believe it was people who had in his study, and it was a large study, people who had 2,000 cumulative hours of cell phone use by the age of 20. I believe the risk of developing an ipsilateral brain tumor, that is a brain tumor on the side of their head where they use their phone, was 4 times higher. So that's just one health impact from one type of exposure in a group.
So that's why like using I mean, we've done this forever in my house, but making sure you don't use a phone up to your head. It's always on speakerphone or at a
Exactly.
minimum earbuds. Can we talk about that really quick? Using like
Yeah.
wired like this, and I know the air tubes, which I don't have, but I know of them. The air ones are even better.
Well, I
Versus
have,
like,
I
everyone's
have
now
the air
using,
tubes right here.
yeah, the Air 2 one,
Yeah.
which is on my list to get, but I usually speakerphone most of the time. But like now everyone's got the earbuds.
Yeah.
But those are emitting, am I correct in saying that those are emitting a lot more EMFs through your body than regular corded earbuds or the earbuds?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, AirPods or AirPod-like products,
Yeah.
those Bluetooth headsets, they they emit less radiation than a cell phone, but obviously they emit much more than a headset or certainly an air tube headset. Um, there's a few other really important considerations with those AirPods. Is one is people tend to use them for extended periods of time, because with EMF, it's not just how strong the radiation is; it's how long you're exposed to it. And so when you're just walking around for hours and hours with your AirPod in your ear, you're getting that consistent exposure. That exposure is very close to your brain, and it's in a part of your head where there's no skull between, between the hole in your ear and your brain. There's no skull. And remember, I said earlier, the skull has a natural degree of, some shielding. So it's in a really vulnerable part of your body and for a really extended period of time. And, this is pretty key for people to understand. People like me can go around and talk about certain scientific studies and what was studied and what was found out, but it's not like they ever commissioned a 10-year study to see what Bluetooth headsets would do to people. They just released the product. So with all of this wireless technology, that is how it is being released, without any long-term testing into what the health impact is. And so we are all effectively the laboratory subjects. The test is being done now in real time on us. People like to think that if a product is available for sale, it is safe. And that is simply not the case with a wide degree of products, but certainly with technology.
So while we're on this topic of technology, because then I want to get back to talking about health and kids and all this stuff,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
is like the watches, right? The Apple
Mm-hmm.
Watch, the Fitbits, all of that. I know for me personally, I can't wear it because it hurts my wrists. My wrists will start hurting. And so that's why I've switched over to the Aura Ring, because it's not constantly emitting EMFs. You can actually shut it off completely. And then you can like put it on the charger if you want and have it sync once a day. So I can still get good health information back and all of that jazz. I use it more for sleep than anything. I don't, not, the exercise portion of it for me, that's my expertise. So I don't need that. But have you seen that? And can you speak to like EMFs? Like when we specifically, like it's one thing to like have so much exposure around us, but then to actually have something like say on our wrist, like, because I'm assuming this is how I feel, is that it's like going through our entire body. And obviously it's really more concentrated where we're wearing it. But yeah, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So yeah, you brought up a lot of good points. So quickly, I'll make one point, and this is a really important one, and it's kind of a broad one, but the power of EMF diminishes exponentially with distance. So if the source, like your Apple Watch, is here and your body is 1 inch away, there'll be a certain exposure. If it's 2 inches away, the power of that exposure will be 75% lower, because that's what an exponential decline in power. So when you're wearing an Apple Watch, yes, your whole body is getting some kind of exposure to what's to the emissions from that device, but it's really going to be strongest and most focused where you're wearing the device. Now, this ties also in a little to your earlier question about how much, especially kids, how much tech they're exposed to. And you raised the point where in today's world, you can't be unexposed. Wherever you go, there's going to be a Wi-Fi network. There's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 or 20 cell towers. There's going to be EMF there. And so to a certain degree in modern society, a certain level of exposure in your daily life is going to be unavoidable. So then the question becomes, what in addition to that should I be engaging in? And to me, that always comes down to a cost benefit analysis, which is, you know, if I'm going to wear an Apple Watch, that's going to expose me to more EMF. So what am I getting out of wearing that watch? Is it really valuable to me? Is it adding value to my life? And I think people are able to make those types of decisions, or at least engage in that type of thinking, but only when they start to realize that they are incurring a cost to their health from engaging with that technology. So I'll give you a really clear-cut example on this one. A mother reached out to me through my website, and she had recently become very aware of EMF. She was very worried about her son because her son, I believe it was he had a blood sugar condition. It was either diabetic or pre-diabetic, something very serious though. And so they fitted him with some type of monitor because they needed to constantly monitor this child's blood sugar. And she made it, I mean, obviously I'm not a doctor. I don't know the potential alternative treatments, but she made it sound like this was a very important device for his health. And she said, what could she do about that? And I said, my reply was, you know, this is clearly bringing a lot of value to your son's health and to your peace of mind. So I wouldn't worry about that device. I would instead look to make changes elsewhere. Cut out EMF in other parts of your life where it's not adding that same type of value. And I think most people don't really need an Apple Watch. I think most people don't need AirPods. And that's where, you know, you just cut out the technology that doesn't actually add real value to your life. That's really the approach that I recommend for people.
No, that's such great advice. So I have a question you brought up, is bringing that up, and you know, like the new glucose patches they're putting in, is that maybe the kind of thing that
I
he had
don't
to
know
wear?
that.
Because that's interesting, because I know that they, like, it connects, if you have to have a smartphone, right? So it's
Okay.
connecting, because I've had them reach out to me. I've been very curious to actually do that, even if it's only for a 2-week period of time, where you're like thinking about that, like, yeah, it's emitting EMFs. Maybe it's worth it to do it for 2 weeks. So then I can fully see, okay, how is my body, how is my glucose responding to the things I'm eating? So I can see that information being really powerful, but yet not something you're going to want to do long term, because then again, you're going to have those EMFs running, especially really high at that part of your arm you have that in. So yeah, like you said, it's like the cost benefit analysis of everything that we've got going on in our lives. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, those are some good things to bring about. So okay, so I want to kind of circle back and talk about kids, because I've heard of, and I know, like, I dealt with mold toxicity, which my audience knows, they've listened to me talk about in the past. And something interesting that I learned through all of that and the research I compiled is that for those that have higher toxicity levels in their body, can also tend to be like the EMFs can exacerbate all of that. And I was like, that's
Yes.
very interesting, right? And I don't know if
Yeah.
you have any more or know anything to add to that, but
Well, we're actually working on content on that right now. But there tends to be an overlap that we see in communities and populations between EMF sensitivity, chemical sensitivity, and some type of toxin. So that could be mold, it could be Lyme disease, it could be other types of toxins that maybe poisoned your liver. So there seems to be an overlap between these types of issues. And it makes sense, because the weaker your body's immune system is, the more vulnerable it's going to be to damage from external forces, which would include EMF. There's also, interestingly, and we do have this on the blog, there is science, not only that exposure to mold makes one more vulnerable to damage from EMF, but that EMF can stimulate mold growth. So there
that
is
is very interesting, right? To
yeah,
think about that. And that's the stuff that I was reading. And I was like, makes you really start thinking. And that was probably at the time that I really realized I was like, I can't wear an Apple Watch and do all that stuff because I was becoming super sensitive to it. So you mentioned immune system. Can you talk to everybody, show everybody what, because immune function, I feel like that's been such a topic of conversation lately. And so can you talk about how EMFs affects, or negatively, I should say, affect our immune function?
Um, sure. If you'll give me 1 second,
Oh, sure.
please. But no, this is an area where there's actually quite a bit. I'm just pulling up information on this specific question, where there's actually quite a bit of science. And you know, last year when COVID hit, there was obviously a huge amount of interest in this area. So there is there's science that well, okay, so EMF, everyone's physiologies are very different. I know that's an issue you address repeatedly in your content, your podcast. Everyone's physiologies are different. Everyone's going to react differently. EMF exposure has been linked both to immunosuppression, so where people's immune systems become weaker to fend off illness from not just from EMF, but from other sources in their environment. But it can also stimulate autoimmune activity where the body starts to treat itself as an enemy. So there's science on both sides of this, where it can weaken your immune system's ability to respond to threats and negative external forces, and B, it can heighten your immune system's sensitivity so that it starts engaging in sabotage.
So, okay, this is really interesting that you said that, especially because you made the comment earlier about how EMF has really increased a lot. I don't know what many folds, right, over the last 10 years. The interesting thing that I find for women's health, especially moms after having babies, is we're seeing such a huge increase in autoimmunity. Right. And there's never one thing, right? I always talk about this, like birth can be a trigger and it can trigger different things in the body, right? That's one. Then we're adding on EMFs. Then we're adding on this mom is depleted and tired. And we've got this just trifecta of so many things kind of working against our body. And it's not to scare anybody. It's just, you know, I love having these conversations to bring awareness, because I always get women who are like, oh my gosh, I never really thought about how much, you know, whatever it is. So for this conversation, like how much you are on your cell phone or how much exposure you are getting. And I know there's a lot of things, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, of like what we can do also to help mitigate some of it. But I think bringing up the immune function and that point of like autoimmunity, because it's sky high and it's on the rise. And it's like, you got a lot of in the medical world, people are like, why is it on the rise? And it's just like, well, take a step back and look at what's changing in our world. And even the last like
no, totally. I agree with you. I refer to it, I mean, I guess this sounds a little depressing, but I refer to it as there's a toxic soup of forces that our bodies are in constant contact with, and the toxicity keeps growing. So, you know, you have issues like chemicals in the food, synthetic building materials that are untested, you have EMF, you have microplastics increasingly in our water and now food supply. You have mercury, and I mean, I could go on, and it's very depressing to do that, so I won't. But the point is, I don't think that EMF is the single source of all of the the growth and negative health effects that we're seeing in populations now. I do think that it is a significant one. And fortunately, it's also one we actually have a fair amount of control over. And that's part of the key message that I try to focus on at SYB.
No, I love that. I'm always about let's spread the message of what we can all do to help mitigate and, you know, make those choices. And even if it's like choosing one thing today and you slowly, it's lifestyle stuff, right? It's just like picking one thing that you feel like you can do today, and then let's pick another one, and let's just move our way into living healthier. And I mean, I wanted to add one thing to what you said, especially if anyone's listening and they haven't listened to past episodes of mine, but the toxicity thing is a real issue. And that's where I learned so much about detoxification, like truly how to detoxify. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole today, but I just want to mention it for listeners. Like if that kind of like brings something up in you, I'm like personal proof, because I've detoxified myself and helped so many others, to know that there you have a lot of more control over all of that. Then we kind of initially are like, oh my gosh, like that fear. Like I'm opposite of like, let's not live in fear. Let's actually like learn the facts and learn the information and take control of our health and our life and our families and all that. So anyway, that's why I love these conversations. So okay, okay, so I was going to ask you, I wanted to bring this up because again, we do have so many moms, and you know, if they've got little one, and I've heard these stories more of like baby toddler, because I think they're at that age where they can't communicate as well and they may be having health issues and things like that. And turned out when the parents or they had someone else come in and test for EMFs in that baby's room, they discovered, oh, my child's been sleeping at the spot in the room that has the highest EMFs, and just changing the position of the bed, putting it in a complete opposite spot of the room, dramatically improved that child's health. Can you
Yeah.
speak to some of that? And like just in our house, I mean, obviously this could be for adults as well, other age children, but maybe this is the conversation about the importance of testing our house. How do we even go about doing that? I have done that, but I would love to hear you talk about that.
Sure. So I actually have a lot of content on my website about this specific issue because I'm a huge advocate of people learning how to test EMF for themselves. It can seem intimidating because you know there's some equipment you need to get that maybe none of your friends have and you've never seen in a store before, and that equipment will give you readings where you know it probably doesn't make sense to you right off the bat, but it's real. To do basic testing is really easy. And so first thing you're going to need to do, oh, and to your point, you know, it helps. Like it's one thing to say, you know, keep the Wi-Fi router as far away from you as possible, because you know the Wi-Fi router is a source of EMF, right? And so you know I'm going to keep that as far away as possible, and then my exposure will be minimized. But there are a lot of sources that you're not going to just intuitively know. There can be different parts of the wiring in your wall that are hotter than others. There could be a device if you live in an apartment building in your neighbor's apartment that is on the other side of the wall and you had no idea. There could be any number of sources. And also to your point, within the same room, you know, you can have a very high level of EMF in one part and a much more reasonable level in another part. And so that's why I'm such a big advocate. And I have a free guide. I have meter recommendations. I have videos that show how to do this. We've done webinars just on this single topic. And that's even though, just to be clear to everybody, I do not make or sell meters. So it's not like I'm trying to sell my own meters. It's something that I really, really believe in. So you need to get an EMF meter. There are a couple that I recommend. There's now, if you look on Amazon or on Google, you know, you'll see a lot of them. A lot of the cheaper ones are almost worthless. So you really, if you're going to do this, which I strongly recommend, you're going to need to spend a minimum of $150 to $180 for a sufficiently decent meter. And then you just learn how to use it. Like I say, you might not know it right now, but if you just take a few minutes to read my guide, you'll figure it out. And then you just go around and you can see where the EMFs are high, where they're lower, where they're more reasonable, where maybe you could move your furniture, where maybe you need protection. I mean, this is really key about EMF, like a lot of toxins, but the EMF is totally invisible. It's odorless. You can't touch it. You can't see it. You can't smell it. And so the only way you're going to know how much there is by testing, which is, and with the massive growth in EMF in our environment, it becomes more and more useful skill to have with each passing day. So if I may, the URL to get that ebook is shieldYourBody. That's all one word, .com/test. And it's a fully free ebook. And it has, like I say, meter recommendations, how-to guides. There's videos on that page, a lot of resources. I am a huge advocate that people learn how to test, because as that example shows, that parent did not need to make a huge change in their life. They did not need to buy a bunch of expensive protective equipment. They did not need to EMF proof their house. They just needed to know where to move the bed. And the only way you're going to know how to do that is to test. You know, some people live in areas where there are EMF experts and you can hire them. And, you know, for certain people that makes a lot of sense, but a lot of people don't live in areas with EMF experts. And if you learn how to do this on your own, you can do it at any time, anywhere you go. Anytime you make a change, you can test and see what the results are.
No, I think testing is so important. I mean, I do that with functional labs. I'm like, we got to start testing instead of just guessing. And it's like, you can't see it, you can't smell it. So it's not one of the first things or one of the top 20 things most people even think about, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know, I've always known about it, but it wasn't until I had a lot of health issues that it became more prominent. And I started seeing like EMFs with mold, and you're like, well, this is so crazy. So I want to also talk with like in testing too, like having people turn off their Wi-Fi at night. And I don't know how many people do that, but I always think that's like one of the easiest things is just shut it off at night. I know people that put timers on it, or like I just unplug mine. Okay, I want to ask you a question. I didn't prompt this to you ahead of time, but what are your thoughts on solar and EMFs?
We just did a bunch of content around that too. So we have a post, we have a webinar archive posted about it. So just to begin, I am a huge advocate of green energy sources. But like with a lot of technology that I appreciate, there need to be safer ways of engaging in this. So with solar, the primary concern from an EMF perspective is something called dirty electricity. Have you ever heard of that term?
Yeah, I have. Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm glad you're bringing that up because I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Sure. So, well, I'll try to be quick and simple about it.
Okay.
You know, there's, especially since a lot of people are just listening to this and can't see a visual aid. Regular electricity, you can think of it as clean. There's a clean sine wave, like a curve. If you measured the electricity of a clean source, you would see a nice clean sine wave. And in the US, it's at a frequency called 60 hertz. Now, when that electricity gets less predictable, and it starts bouncing all around, so it's not a clean wave anymore, but it has all these other electrical forces kind of riding along, then it becomes what's called dirty electricity. Where does dirty electricity come from? It comes from it can come from a few different types of sources, but really it comes from things like motors, like you would have in a blender, that's plugged into your wall. So when you turn on the blender, that introduces these crazy wavelengths into your building's electricity, and it becomes dirtier. Another thing is chargers. And chargers are a source because they have inverters. And inverters turn AC power, which is what you get out of the wall, into DC power, which is what batteries are, or vice versa. So like a cell phone charger is going to turn AC power into DC power for your phone. Those inverters are a huge source of dirty electricity. And they are a key component of every solar power installation. So when you install solar power, you know, yes, the panels can be a source of EMF, and yes, there are safer ways to kind of position them, and you could put shielding in, but they're not really the big worry when it comes to EMF from solar. It's the inverter that you install in the system, because the solar panel charges a battery, which is DC, or generates power that's DC, which you either use directly or charges a battery. Then you have to convert that DC into AC so you can plug stuff into your walls. And it's that inverter that can create a massive amount of dirty electricity. There are things you can do about that, but it's not an easy fix. And you generally need an expert to do it right.
So I want to ask a question because this is, I feel like you can find, like they have like plug-in things you can add to your wall plugins. I've
Hmm.
seen those, but what's your thought? It sounds to me like those are
Yeah.
probably not ideal because don't you need like an expert to then like, you need to really ground your entire house, correct? Something along those lines. Like,
So yeah. So the filters you're talking about, there's some from Stetzer, so Stetzer filters, and there's some from a company called Greenwave. Those are the two most popular. They run, actually, I forget those price. It also depends on how many you need. You can buy those and use them. Those companies also sell meters. Those are about $130. They're dirty electricity meters. And so you can kind of take some measurements and then put in the filters and then take some measurements again and see if you've made a big improvement or not. But yes, in my experience, yes, grounding is a part of it. But knowing where to ground is another big part of it. And so that's why generally you would want an expert in that. And, the Building Biology Institute is a great source of those types of experts that can help with those specific problems. Again, those people aren't in every town, but there are a lot of them around the US and increasingly around the world. And those are the types, because a lot of normal electricians won't know what you're talking about when you talk about this stuff. But I will say, because I also like giving people actionable, saying go out, research, find an expert, hire them, come in, yes, that's what you should do. But I also like giving people immediately actionable options. So one thing you can do, if you already have solar power, or if you're seriously thinking about getting it, is to install a kill switch in your breaker box. So that, for instance, you can just fully power down your bedroom at night. So then there's no, because if you install a kill switch, there's no current reaching the wiring in your bedroom, and you won't be exposed to dirty electricity at night while you sleep. And that's a huge part of your day. As you know, it's a particularly important part because it's where you restore yourself, you rest up, you get healthy for the next day. So if you can just install a kill switch to depower your bedroom at night, you're making a huge difference right there.
oh, I appreciate you talking about that. I know it was kind of a, big question, but
Yeah, no.
but it's a real thing, right? And the solar is something that, we're seeing more and more of, which again, I is great, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, it's awesome. It's just okay, how do we emit? Yeah, and I'm glad you clarified that because I actually thought it was more EMF and it's more the dirty electricity that's the problem with it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Okay, so I also wanted to make sure we talk about reproduction because I think
Okay.
that that's a big thing with EMFs. And, guys put their phone in their pockets, and, put a laptop on top of their lap. And, women having like, even like I know our leggings now, we have it down by our leg. It's still pretty close to our ovaries and uterus and all of that. And so, and then again, kind of going back to where we started this whole conversation is kids. Kids are starting at such a young age, doesn't matter female or male, boys or girls, because we've got to have both. And, so I've read stuff in the past too, that there can be a direct negative correlation with EMFs and reproduction. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's a very well studied area, and you are correct. It is not safe to carry your phone in your pocket. Even this, so you know the regulations that exist for things like cell phones, they are massively insufficient. They are not enough to protect ourselves from the radiation. But even if you thought they were, if you check the manual for these things, they tell you to hold it a certain distance away from your body, and that all their
Which nobody
safety,
does, by the way.
which nobody
Nobody.
does. And if you carry it in your pocket, you're not doing. Cell phones are huge. You also mentioned laptops. There's in the Dell laptop manual, it tells you to keep the laptop 7 or 8 inches away from your lap, from anywhere in your body. And they actually call them laptops. But hidden in the manual, it says you have to keep it at least 7 inches away from your body. And so this technology, even what I'm trying to say is even the manufacturers say it's not safe. You don't need to subscribe to the EMF health advocates or people like me. You don't need to listen to us. Just look at the manual and you'll see even the manufacturer is telling you. They're telling you very quietly so you don't have to pay attention, but they're telling you not to do this stuff. And infertility and subfertility, reproduction in general, it's one of the areas that's where we're seeing the most impact. It's also very well researched. And one of the reasons is because, if you're studying something like, brain tumors, you have to study for 10, 20, even 30 years to see what the impact is, because these tumors can take that long to form. But with reproduction, men regenerate sperm every day, and a human gestation period is 9 months, right? So you're talking about much shorter timeframes in order to be able to study, which is why you can see so much data on this. And with men in particular, because the sperm is stored in the way it is, it's in a much more vulnerable location than ovaries are, than eggs are in women, because it's outside of the body without any natural shielding at all. And it's right next to where the pocket is. So if the phone is right, you're exposing sperm to really high, people need to understand that cell phones, especially if you're right up against it, are really high doses of this stuff. It's not like a cell phone is a low dose. The further away it is from you, the lower the dose, but it's a very high, these things need to be able to communicate over miles and miles. And so it's not even like Bluetooth, which I was advising against earlier in our conversation. It's much more powerful than that. So in terms of the impacts you're seeing, particularly in men, you're seeing there's very good data that it causes either infertility, subfertility, or other types of damage to the sperm, where it is not able to perform the way that you need it to in order to get pregnant. Interestingly, because some men, you tell them that and they're like, oh, good, I'm not looking to get anyone pregnant. And then you tell them, it's also now there's a body of science showing that it's contributing to erectile dysfunction. And suddenly they become much more concerned about the potential impact.
Now you've got their attention.
Yeah. So fortunately for instance, the infertility, the subfertility, if EMF is a contributing factor to a man's infertility or subfertility, this is one area of good news because, again, as I said just a minute ago, sperm is regenerated every 24 hours. And so if you stop carrying the phone in your pocket, you are going to see an improvement in your sperm count. And again, there's a lot of science on this. I have a bunch of it posted on the website. Now, when it comes to women, I am not aware of that much science into the fertility aspect, but during pregnancy, during gestation, there is a significant and growing body of science about damage to the fetus. There is a study, and again, I apologize, I'm not as good at memorizing numbers as some other people are, but I believe it was okay. women who used a cell phone in this one study, women who, I believe it was a Kaiser Permanente study, and women who used a cell phone during pregnancy, there was a 2.67 times greater chance of miscarriage. So that is a very significant increase in risk of miscarriage. But it doesn't have, obviously that's a very tragic outcome, but there are other less severe outcomes that are also quite undesirable. So there's a study linking EMF exposure in utero to increase in asthma by the age of 13. So there's a wide variety of of negative health effects that come from in utero exposures that have been documented by, again, by high quality science. So on the fertility side, at least in terms of what I've seen, it really is the men. But then, of course, once the pregnancy occurs, it becomes the fetus that you need to worry about, and there are quite a number of disturbing health effects that have been documented from EMF exposure in utero.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We could talk about this for hours, right? There's so much stuff. So I encourage everyone to, like, if you feel called to one direction or another and all this, like, go start doing some more of your own research. Because we get a lot of pregnant moms that listen too, and absolutely, unfortunately, we do have women that have miscarriages, and it's sad, and it's awful. And I do know, and I want you to share a little bit more about some things that we can do, because I know you've got some amazing products, which I think are absolutely necessity in this day and age. I know you've got a blanket for babies, which I saw. I was like, that's really cool. I like that. That's awesome. Like a shield. Do we have a belly band for moms that
I
wear all the time?
There are companies that make that. I have not. I haven't added that to my catalog yet. We're growing, as quickly as we can.
That's on the next I'm going to tell you, that needs to be next on your list. I got all my mamas, they're going to buy it from you, because I think that just with everything you said, right, there's so many things, but that's one easy thing to just wear every single day. And it's just an extra layer of protection for baby, right?
Yeah, no, totally agreed. In general, and I like my products. They're very good products. They're all lab tested, so they really work. Because there's a lot of EMF protection out there that maybe you're not quite sure if it really is working. So all my stuff is lab tested. But I like to make it very clear to people that EMF protection products, like the ones I make and sell, they're what I call a second line of defense. And the first line of defense is actually reducing your exposure to the pollutant or the toxin in the first place. And so that comes down to the two key rules, which are to minimize use of EMF generating technology, and then to maximize the distance between your body and that technology when it is in use. So as a couple of examples, we talked just a bit ago about not carrying your phone in your pocket. That's a great example of maximizing distance. That carry it in some other, for instance, I have a phone pouch that makes it safer to carry the phone in your pocket. I have a sling bag that makes it easier to carry your phone or your tablet or bigger technology. It's shielded, so it goes away from your body. Or just put your phone into airplane mode when you're carrying it in your pocket. By the way, the same thing, I tend to always say don't carry your phone in your pocket, but it should be don't carry your phone in your pocket or your bra, because a lot of women carry their phones in their bras, and there is science showing that linking that to incidence of breast tumors. So that's a good one. You mentioned another one earlier. I didn't even have to bring it up, but that's turning off your Wi-Fi at night. That's a really important one that people, because some people say that you should rewire basically go wired. So switch from Wi-Fi to Ethernet, which is the safer, healthier thing to do, but a lot of people aren't going to do it. And so, but turning off your Wi-Fi at night is a really good way of minimizing your exposure, because you're asleep for 6 to 8 hours. You're not getting any benefit. Again, this goes back to the cost benefit analysis. You're not getting any benefit from your Wi-Fi being on all night, but you're getting the cost of the exposure. So turn it off. And the third one is never to talk on the phone up against your head, but instead to use a speakerphone or headset instead of that. So, and there are a lot, once you start thinking in this way, and I know you're a health advocate, so you understand when you can start seeing these changes in people, but once you start thinking in this way, you'll start realizing all the other things that you could do, and maybe, you're willing to do, one thing at a time, like, I'm not gonna get the Apple Watch. I'm not gonna use the laptop on my lap. I'm not going to get a smart TV. I'm just going to get a dumb TV. You know, there's any number of different things that you could do. You don't have to do all of them. The more of them you do, the less your exposure will be, and the more reduced your risk, your health risk will be from EMF. But then you get things like EMF protection products like mine, which thank you for bringing up. So I already gave the example of the foam pouch, which is for 5 years now, my most popular product. You put your phone in the pouch. The back of the pouch is radiation shielded, but the front isn't. So that's what allows your phone to still communicate, but it deflects the radiation away from your body. I have a laptop pad that makes it safer to use the laptop in your lap. Again, I tell both of these are products where I tell, don't carry your phone in your pocket, but if you do, you know, here's the phone pouch. Don't use the laptop in your lap, but if you do, here's the laptop pad. But I have about 20 products. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's some that are designed. So those are products that are designed to protect you from exposures you could avoid yourself if you wanted to make some behavioral changes. There are others, though. You mentioned the baby blanket.
Yeah.
That is going to protect your baby against exposures that maybe you don't have control over. So it could be, you know, the nearby cell phone towers, the nearby Wi-Fi routers, the nearby, all these sources that are not in your control. You know, that the baby blanket would help shield your baby against those exposures. The same thing is true for the men's underwear, the men's boxer briefs that we make, which are
It's really smart, by the way. I'm seeing more clothing. Like I got beanies
yeah,
for my family for Christmas. So we were talking tinfoil hat. I'm like, well, it kind of is, but you know,
much more stylish.
but it's yeah, but
Yeah.
it's, you know, I'm like, and I got like just a t-shirt, which I'm like for when you fly and stuff, especially like I'm thinking like, okay, what are your ways you can mitigate? And I know there's like a fine line. Some people probably think I'm crazy, but it is. It's like you initially like make some small changes, and I'm just to a point in my life where I'm like, sure, I'll buy the beanie and I'll buy the t-shirt and get the underwear for my husband, like whatever it is, right? Because it's like I don't know, I feel like that it can be beneficial,
Mhm.
and so anyway, there was something else I thought I was going to ask you, and then it totally left me. So we'll see if it comes back in like the next minute.
Okay. No, you know, people ask me, what's a safe level of EMF? And the answer I have is accurate and also to a lot of people may be disappointing, but it really is the key to how you need to think about this, which is and it's what my father used to say, which is the only safe level of EMF is none. And when I say none, you know, there is a certain very small level of natural EMF that comes to us from the sun and from the Earth's own magnetic field. And that is the type of EMF that our bodies evolved over millennia to exist in and to thrive in. In today's cities, the background level, just the background level, you're not using a cell phone, just the background level of EMF in today's cities is estimated to be 1 trillion times higher than what is found in nature. And so any exposure beyond that natural level that our bodies evolved to thrive in, that is what is unsafe. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have any. It means every additional exposure brings some cost to your health. And so that's why you need to figure out where you are able to make those reductions in your life, either through behavior or through product changes. Product EMF protection products.
And oh, this is what I was going to mention is with kids and cell phones, like start their habits good. When they're young, get them cases for their phones or like your pocket, something to just help because, you know, like in my house, I try my best to make sure my kids, one, they're not on their phone very much, but then like they're downstairs and off at night versus not having that habit of having them in their room. And like, there's just those little things that sometimes you don't even like think about until someone's
Mm-hmm.
brought awareness to it. And like the smart TVs, like the interesting thing about all this stuff, right, is we're becoming such a tech society, which is awesome in so many ways, but yet it's actually getting harder and harder to get away from tech. Because like if you want to go get like an old school TV that's not a smart TV, they're actually getting harder to find. Because
Yeah.
we've gone through that. My husband would love a new TV in our living room, but I don't want a smart TV. And I'm like, I know it would be convenience, but I'm like, we just hook the iPad, which gives a lot less. It still gives some, right? But it's going to be a lot less than I would assume. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. But is an iPad
Well,
going to
if
be
you if you
less?
got if you bought a meter, you could test
I
for
will test
yourself. And
it. Yeah, I have
yeah.
test. I'm gonna have to get my own so I can test these little things. So maybe I don't know. So anyway, interesting thoughts. Now that I'm bringing more awareness to things too. So that's why I love these conversations. So, okay, I know we've been chatting for a long time. Like we could keep going, but I won't keep you any longer. So will you just share with everybody what is your website? And then of course I will put the link in the show notes. And I know you had sent a link as well to
Yeah,
me.
so it's shield your body, all one word, shieldyourbody.com/core connections. And you can learn more about my company. You can get a free guide about the top 5 ways you can reduce your exposure to EMF for free immediately without buying anything. And also, if you're interested in my products, you can get a coupon for my store. So it's shieldyourbody.com/core connections.
Well, thank you so much, Ara. This has been a wonderful and hopefully very eye-opening conversation for so many.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Erica.